Hi, everyone. My name is Soresh, and I'm excited to be here for this session to present the results of the AVA ActiveSpeaker Challenge at the 2022 iteration of the ActivityNet workshop. We've done a few of these challenge iterations so far, and they have included an action recognition task and an active speaker detection task based on the published papers that you see here. And you can find more details on our work as well as previous iterations of the challenge on the AVA website linked below here. The active speaker detection task was developed as a critical component of conversation analysis in videos where the dynamic nature of the content, as you can see from the GIF here, presents many challenges to automatic conversation analysis. The active speaker detection task itself has been visually grounded to individual faces where given a single face bounding box and audio, the task is to determine whether that face is speaking or not. And we do this independently for each of the visible faces on screen. The evaluation metric for the challenge this year and in all the years past has been mean average precision. In this slide, you can see summary statistics of the dataset released for training and evaluation. So on the left-hand side, you see that we've released labels from 153 videos with about 40,000 labeled tracks and over 3.5 million labeled bounding boxes. On the right-hand side, you can see the distribution over time for each of these labels in the training split. And finally, we've released the held out dataset, which consists of tracks from 109 videos with over 2 million labeled bounding boxes. The ground truth labels for these bounding boxes have not been released, and the participants attempt to predict them using their models in this challenge. With that, let's jump to the challenge results for 2022 and the top 3 teams this year. In third place, we have the IVUL KAUST team. I understand that Juan from this team will be at CVPR in person, so feel free to reach out to him at the conference directly as well. And congratulations to our participant. In second place, we have Intel Labs. This is their first time participating in the challenge. Congratulations on second place. And finally, in first place, repeating their success at the top of the leaderboard from last year is the team from ICT CAS UCAS. They've pushed their numbers even higher from last year, and congratulations to them for being a repeat winner of this challenge. As you can see, our participants have moved the state-of-the-art forward further from the previously published best results as well, and we're going to hear about how they did it next. The slides and the reports from the winners can all be found at research.google.com/AVA. Thank you all for being here, and up next, we'll turn it over to our winning teams. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the presentation for our submission to the ActivityNet Challenge Active Speaker Task. The submission is titled End-to-End Active Speaker Detection, and it was done at IVUL in KAUST. Our task is the active speaker detection. It focuses on figuring out which of the visible persons in the scene could be the active speaker. Remember, there could also be off-screen speech. It's an inherently multimodal task because actually not one single modality can give you a full idea of who is the active speaker. The visual modality can give you some hints about the motion of the lips, but could also have some false positives. The audio modality will just give you some idea if there is some sort of a speech in the scene or not. The classic approach to the active speaker problem will try to fuse audio-visual features, visual features from a face tracklet, and audio features from the waveform. This is suitable for scenes with a single speaker because you can sort of easily find an attribution of the speech event, but may fail if there are multiple speakers in the scene. The issue is that given the multiple candidates, false positives are quite common. Given this limitation, modern methods for active speaker detection have focused on modeling contextual information. Basically, there are two types of context: the temporal context, where you aggregate multiple consecutive clips of the same identity, and the visual context, where you aggregate the other multiple tracklets which are visible in the scene. When you aggregate both of these informations, you actually have a single assignation problem, where you try to figure out the speech event, which one of the multiple tracklets was the one that created it, and you can also enforce some temporal consistency along the time axis. But the context aggregation is not a silver bullet for the ActiveSpeaker program. Basically, the bigger the context you model, the more heavier your processing is going to be. And the issue here is that you're not going along just a single video track, you're going along multiple facial tracks plus an audio track. So the longer this temporal, the bigger this spatial context is, the more GPU memory and the more processing you need. That's why most methods have resorted to two-stage approaches. Basically, they perform first feature extraction, and then they model the context over the extracted features. The issue here is you cannot be sure if these features are actually optimal for the second stage. This is the key in our submission. We want to model end-to-end the relationship between the visual and the audio patterns, and we want to do this for every visible person in the scene, while still maintaining long-term correspondences and multiple spatial correspondences. To do this, we rely on an end-to-end architecture, which is trained with a fusion model based on a graph convolutional network. This is the key idea behind our architecture called end-to-end active speaker detection, or EASY for short. It consists of 3 stages, where in the first stage, you encode visual and audio features from multiple tracklets and multiple timestamps to create an intermediate spatiotemporal embedding which contains all the information which is relevant in the scene. This intermediate embedding goes through a GCN layer which we design as the interleaving GCN, and then creates a final prediction labeling the active speakers and all the silent persons in the scene. For the first stage, we sample video features across simultaneous tracklets, along with the corresponding audio track. But we must also sample long-term information from the same speaker and also the context of that speaker in a different timestamp. To simplify the processing, we use sharded weights in the 3D CNN and also sharded weights on the 2D CNN for different timestamps of the audio track. Now, these simple solutions create a big problem, and that is you're going to have way too much data to pass through each of these encoders. Our solution is simple, yet effective. We just subsample the temporal axis and perform a dense sampling only at a given set of temporal endpoints. These endpoints are separated by a stride of k, and we select up to L of them. There are 2 consequences of this feature sampling. First, it largely simplifies the computational load and GPU memory consumption. Second, it also reduces the overlap between the sample clips. The only expense of this is that you are aggregating a couple of hyperparameters that you will have to explore later in the problem. After obtaining the multimodal features, we arrange them in a multimodal graph structure. We have 2 types of nodes: visual nodes, here shown in blue, and audio nodes, here shown in yellow. Basically, we want to find an assignation in between the features in the yellow node, that is the audio node, to the features in the blue node, that is one of the visual nodes. To do this, we use all the ground truth for the active speaker into the visual nodes and supervise the audio node by telling if there is a speech or if it is a silent scene. We process this graph structure into what we call the interleaving GCN. This GCN architectural pattern basically splits the message passing step. First, we perform spatial message passing among all the adjacent tracklets in a single scene, and then we perform temporal message passing, that is, message passing along the same tracklet at different timestamps. We also use intermediate supervision for the audio encoder and for the visual encoder. In particular, we use a ResNet 3D for the visual encoder and a ResNet 18 2D for the audio encoder. We also supervise every visual node and every audio node in the final layer. For the final prediction, we only use the prediction of the visual nodes. We tested our model without any other bells and whistles, and we obtained 94.1 in the validation set and 93.0 in the test set. An archive report of our method is already available, and the code will be made available soon.
Hello everyone, I'm Kyle Min from Intel Labs, and I'm going to talk about spatial temporal graph learning for video understanding. We submitted this work to ECCV this year, and we are planning to release the code in the near future, so please stay tuned. Recently, researchers started to use the context information in multi-speaker scenarios for active speaker detection, or ASD. For example, this method called ASC was proposed to leverage the long-term relationships between the potential speakers. It consists of two stages, where the first one is called a feature encoding stage for audio-visual feature extraction. The second part is called a context reasoning stage, and its job is to model the long-term relationships between the speakers and their temporal patterns, which brings a large performance gain. For this year's challenge, we proposed a new method based on spatial temporal graph learning named SPELL, which is capable of modeling extremely long-term context information, and on top of this, has lower computation cost. SPELL converts a very long video into a graph structure where each face region corresponds to a graph node, and the spatial and temporal interactions between the faces are captured by graph edges. After constructing the graph, SPELL uses GNNs to solve the problem of ASD as a binary node classification. First, I'll explain how we construct the spatial temporal graph from a video. In this image, 3 video frames are temporally ordered from left to right, and 3 colors of blue, red, and yellow represent 3 different face identities that are present in the frames. As I mentioned previously, in SPELL, each face in a frame is used as a graph node. For the edges, there are 2 types. First, we connect all the nodes within a frame using undirected edges to encode relationships between different face regions. In addition, the nodes corresponding to each face identity are connected across the frames to encode their temporal dynamics. For this second type of edges that are for temporal dynamics, we use all 3 forward, backward, undirected edges to embed more detailed temporal information to the graph. After we construct such graphs from a video, we use GNNs to predict a binary label for ASD. Specifically, for each forward, backward, undirected graph, 3 layers of GNN modules are used to aggregate spatial temporal information. The first layer is implemented by EdgeConf, which is known to be effective in modeling pairwise relational information. SageConf has a similar form, but it models an information from a single node, so it has fewer parameters. We discovered that placing EdgeConf first and SageConf in later layers provides better performance while using less number of parameters than only using EdgeConf in all 3 layers. First, we wanted to make sure that our proposed SPELL is effective in learning useful context information. All of these methods in this table have multi-stage frameworks. Here, stage 1 MAP is the detection performance when using only the feature encoding stage. So the difference between this and final MAP can provide a good insight on the capacity of the context reasoning modules. As you can see, SPELL outperforms all the other methods in terms of the context reasoning capacity. In table below, we compare the complexity of the context reasoning stage of SPEL with ASC and ASDNet. These methods have more than 10 times the parameters and model size than ours, but ours brings more performance increase. Although the results of these two tables demonstrate that SPEL is effective, the final MAP is still more than 1% lower than the leading state-of-the-art method. This is mostly because recently proposed methods rely on complex architectures for processing audio-visual features. For example, as you can see from a table on the right, TalkNet and ASDNet use 3D CNNs in the feature encoding stage, which require more parameters and computation costs. So instead of using complex 3D CNNs, we improved the performance of the feature encoding stage by using a technique called TSM that does not introduce any additional parameters nor computation cost. It was proposed in ICCP 2019 as a generic module for any 2D CNNs, which is capable of modeling short-term temporal information. By using 2D ResNet architecture augmented with TSM, we could improve the overall performance a lot. For the challenge, we used the features encoded by 2-stream ResNet 50 to further boost the performance. There are other techniques we used to improve the performance. First one is audio data augmentation. Specifically, for each audio signal in a batch, we randomly select another audio sample from the whole training dataset and add it after decreasing its volume by a random factor. This technique can effectively increase the number of training samples for the feature encoder by selecting random samples from the whole training set. The second technique we used is named spatial features. We thought that the spatial locations of speakers can be another type of inductive bias, so we project the 4D vector of face box coordinates to a 64 feature vector and append it to the visual feature. This table below summarizes the contributions of individual components. SPEL also shows good performance qualitatively. In this video, the result of ASC is included for additional comparison. SPEL detects active speakers very well, even when ASC fails to detect them. And we believe that this is because SPEL considers context information for a longer period of time than ASC. So far, I have presented an effective graph-based approach for active speaker detection. The main idea was to capture the long-term spatial and temporal relationships among the face crops through our unique graph structure. In addition, by using TSM augmented feature encoder, we could improve the performance further with no additional parameters. Therefore, SPEL outperforms all the previous approaches and requires significantly less hardware resources. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Yuan Hang from Institute of Computing Technology, Chinese Academy of Sciences and University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. In this video, I'm glad to present you our team's first place solution to this year's AVA ActiveSpeaker Detection Challenge. This is a joint work with Susan, Shuang, and Shiguang. The ActiveSpeaker detection task aims to determine when each visible person in the video is speaking by analyzing audio and visual signals. Current methods usually operate on a per-candidate basis and fall into one of two categories: supervised approaches, which formulate the task as a frame-wise binary classification problem, and unsupervised approaches, which use synchronization cues or clustering methods to establish correspondence between the voice and speaking phases. For the first part of this talk, I'm going to briefly review two of our previous works which we build our current work on, Unicorn and Extended Unicorn. As we mentioned earlier, many ASD methods focus on modeling each candidate in the frame separately. However, contextual understanding can be very useful for solving this task. For example, a background actor with lower relative visual saliency in the frame is unlikely to be the true active speaker in most cases. On the other hand, a person who has other people's visual attention tends to be the active speaker. Temporal continuity and relative audio-visual correspondence are also useful cues when some inputs are ambiguous or of lower quality. All these types of evidence emerge from contrasting the competing candidates and holistic consideration of the scene. This motivated us to propose the Unified Context Network, or UNICON, which leverages multiple sources of contextual information to analyze all speaker candidates simultaneously. The scale and position of the candidates' faces are introduced as global spatial context to complement facial information and help identify the relationships among the speakers. Each candidate is then contrasted with others from both visual and audio-visual perspectives. Temporal context is incorporated to further improve consistency and robustness. Based on the aggregated contextual features, speaker activity predictions for all candidates are generated simultaneously using a shared prediction layer. Specifically, in UNICON, face positions and sizes of all candidates are encoded as maps of 2D Gaussians. These maps are then color-coded to indicate the relationships between the candidates and embedded with a convolutional encoder, resulting in each candidate's spatial context. The relational context component then takes the initial features and refines them by considering the relationships between the candidates from visual and audio-visual perspectives. For visual relational context, it uses a permutation equivariant layer to aggregate each candidate's local activity and the person's pairwise interactions with other candidates in the scene. For audio-visual relational context, each candidate's audio-visual affinity features are contrasted with the global maximum, and non-active candidates are suppressed. In the process, temporal context is considered by using bidirectional GRUs. For Extended Unicorn, our winning solution from last year, we used a more recent architecture known as Conformer, which yielded better performance when combined with training on longer samples and stronger audio features. Now I will provide a brief summary of this year's underlying model, Unicorn Plus. To summarize, as of Extended Unicorn, we have been working on individual scenes that are identified by shot boundaries. In other words, we only work with time-overlapping face tracks. We noticed that in movies and long videos with multiple shots, such as those in AVA ActiveSpeaker, there are often many recurring identities in these different scenes. Therefore, in Unicorn Plus, we add a cross-scene information exchange module after scene-level modeling, which allows useful information to flow across scenes. Accordingly, we add a new loss term which supervises the fully connected layer after the exchange module. We take advantage of the recent audiovisual person search, or APES dataset. It provides ground truth identities for the entire AVA ActiveSpeaker training and validation set. Here are 4 examples from the APES paper, where recurring characters from different scenes are identified and assigned a common person ID. We use this extra information to group scenes with common identities together for training and evaluation. For the test set or an arbitrary video, however, we do not have this information, so we approximate person IDs through face track clustering. First step of the cross-scene exchange module is information aggregation, where we collect identity and speech-related information from each face track inside the scene. Here, Identity-related information is computed as a plain average of the contextual features over all time steps, while speech-related information is computed as a weighted average using initially predicted scene-level ASD scores. Next, we perform cross-scene information exchange. For this purpose, we use a bidirectional GRU which accepts the aggregated information and proceeds one step per scene for each identity. The following is an illustrative animation for the process. Initially, the information pool is initialized to a common vector for all identities. Upon a new scene, the aggregated features are fed to the GRU. The information pool is updated with the GRU outputs and reused in future scenes. Finally, the information is collected and concatenated to the initial scene features and passed to the following fully connected layer for prediction. Finally, to further improve detection performance, we perform model ensembling and test time augmentation for our final submission. The final checkpoint is an average of the 5 best checkpoints on the validation set. We also perform 10-crop inference, which helps counteract occasional bounding box drift due to extreme poses, etc. We now present our final results. From this table, we can see that our best performing Unicorn Plus model improves the previous state-of-the-art extended Unicorn by 1% absolute MAP on both the validation and the test set, without any pre-training. Finally, we present an ROC curve partitioned by phase size, similar to that provided with the AVA baseline paper. We first noticed that the performance on the large subset is almost saturated. Next, we observe that although our model employs scene-level contextual modeling and cross-scene exchange, false positive rate is still almost constant for all subsets as the balanced accuracy point, showing that our model does not require additional calibration. Finally, there is still a notable gap for the small subset in terms of true positive rate, which deserves more investigation. Thanks for watching, and here are links to websites where you can find more information. Please follow for future updates. Thank you.